All right, Sam, we have 1 minute. I'm guessing, well, we have people, I guess, already watching now, so we'll start in 1 minute.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll send subliminal messages across the airwaves.
That's very good. That really looks, I mean, I like it.
All right, I think everybody's coming in now. It's just so different doing everything digital, Sam, nowadays, and most of you guys are already used to it with your church stuff. And it's also interesting the excuses that have kind of evolved now. People who were late for church when we had regular church services, they're the ones that are late to get on for the digital service, or people, oh, I've got all this extra time right now, but I haven't had enough time to watch your sermons, Pastor. Those sort of things. So you guys can relate. So I'm sure there's a few guys though that have very good reasons why they're running a little bit late. Here it is, Tuesday afternoon is a whole lot different than the people with nothing to do on Sunday morning. But all of you who are on time, thank you very much. And those of you getting on, thank you very much for coming on to this webcast today. I'm Isaac Crockett. I am a co-host of Stand in the Gap Television, and I help with Stand in the Gap Today some as well. And we're here to hear from Sam Rohrer. He's the president of the American Pastors Network. And most of you probably already know Sam, know a lot about him, know his history, but he has served as a minister to the Lord in a lot of different capacities for about 20 years in a political arena in the government. And he has a real heart for pastors, all of us. And so we're going to hear from him today a little bit about the issues here. And then we'll take question and answers. So if you have questions, feel free to enter those. If you go to the bottom of your webinar screen there on the Zoom, kind of hover your mouse around, and there should be a spot there that says Q&A. If you click on that Q&A, it should open up a questions part. You can kind of move that into whatever part of the screen you want, and you can type your questions there. If your questions aren't answered in this, the program itself by Sam, we will try to take as many as we can. We're going to try to keep all of this very brief. And so having said that, I think those are the main things right now to get started. So Sam Rohrer, I'll turn it over to you at this time.
Thank you, Isaac, and I just want to welcome all of you who are participating with us today. This short emphasis was open to all pastors that are on the APN list and others if you got it, but across the country. We're sitting here in Pennsylvania right now, at least I am. Isaac's just across the border in New York, but he's still Pennsylvania at heart. That's where his church was for over 10 years. But so this is open to all, but I wanted to actually bring this issue forward on the matter of the CARES Act. It's caused a lot of question. I think all of you probably watching right now have either already made a determination as a church and church leadership of whether or not you ought to apply for and receive and spend the money from this National Care Act, or you've decided not to. And there are a lot of reasons that have been given for, I'm actually going to give some at the end of this program, 5 reasons that there were some leaders, put it this way, some leaders in this country who were strongly advocating for pastors to take the money. And I'm not going to share them right now, but I am at the end because it may really surprise you. I didn't agree with it, but many were being encouraged to do so. But because of the nature of the fact that the Bible does not say, thou shalt not take care money, or the Bible does not say, thou shalt take care money, there's no direct command. We're into an area of principle. And that's been a kind of like a foreign territory for a lot of people to travel. We've not done that generally, had to do that too often as church leaders, particularly as relates to government. But we're in a strange time when government is now stepping into the space of the church, enticing, in this case, I'm going to say perhaps with care money, but stepping into the space of the church. And so we're in an area of having to say, all right, how do we handle this area of civil authority that governs our people not even coming to church, as an example, or how we worship and all of that. And we're going to be, as a part of a Zoom call tomorrow with Matt Staver, I'll just mention it right now, we're going to be doing from 10 o'clock a.m. to 11 o'clock a.m. Eastern time tomorrow. We'll be talking about regathering the church. And so we'll be looking at some legal matters. We're talking about some theological issues and some practical things. And we're going to gear that primarily for Pennsylvania pastors. But if you're watching, no matter where you are, you can participate as well, because I think it'll be helpful in that regard. But in regard to the care money, what prompted me to kind of offer some suggestion here was that I was contacted by a lot of pastors and saying, what do you think? Sam, you've been in office for 20 years. You kind of counseled us as pastors when you're in office about laws. What about this one? All right, part of that's there. And then it was a week ago, this past Thursday, on April 23rd, that some additional regulations came out from the Small Business Association, which is the administrative part that was set up by the law, the CARE Act, to write the regulations governing the receipt of the money. And it was in the promulgation of some of those regulations that caused a number of people, or it should, to say, wait a minute, what are we doing? And they gave a window, and this is the reason for wanting to put this in here today. There is a short window of time between now and May the 7th, which is Thursday of this week, that if a church has taken money, and once they hear the guidelines that were offered, if they want to give that money back, they will be held harmless under the law and will be considered as if they had never applied for it or taken the money. So there is a time frame I'm wanting to put out there for you, that if you've taken money, after I've walked through a few things, you may decide, I don't want that money, and you can give it back. And so forth. So I wanted to put that right up front. Let me just walk through a few things here, and I'm going to try and do this in about 12 or 15 minutes, and then we can take questions. And as Isaac mentioned, at the bottom of your screen, you can put down there where it says Q&A, and then you can put in some questions. Isaac's going to take them, and he'll consolidate, and he'll pose them to me at the end. So hopefully this will be efficient, but we're not going to waste your time. Let's do this. Josh, if you can put up on the screen, first slide I put together, these are just some primary thoughts I would like to walk through. Probably nothing new to you, but I have found that in this time frame, a lot of these were kind of put to the side, particularly when there were those who were really pushing pastors and churches, take the money, take the money, take the money. A lot of these things were ignored. For instance, a reality, there is no such thing as free money. A lot of folks said, hey, here's a loan. We're not, that may turn into a grant. We won't have to pay it back. It's free money. All right, we got to go get it. But there's no such thing as free money. The second point is that when government gets involved, there's always strings. There are always strings attached. Thirdly, what government allocates, government regulates. That ties back into the string idea, that whenever there's a nexus with government, there is always a contractual arrangement that's set up that will open the pathway for regulation that otherwise would not exist. Number four, there are no biblical precedents for pursuing or accepting government aid. And other than an example that some would come up with, that King Cyrus gave some money to Nehemiah and Ezra to help them rebuild the wall as government aid. Even that was not the same as this, because that was project money but the government actually said we were the fault of tearing down your wall and we're responsible to pick it up. A little different, not the same as what we're talking about here. Number 5, as a general principle, taking government money, care money in this case, really does challenge a church's reliance on God, because it asks the question, am I going to government for help or am I going to God for help? And then sixthly, it sets a negative precedent for the future. And what I mean by that is that once a church or a business or an individual, however it may be, enters into a relationship with government, now something has been done and it sets a precedent that makes anything in the future far more easy to occur. So just remember that as we kind of get into it. Let me take you, if I can here, Josh, to the next slide. In the law, and I found that most congressmen who passed this law, they never read it. And that's no surprise, because I found that never happened when I was in office. Most people never read the law. But the piece of the law that was passed, the CARES Act, was just one section. It was section 1102. I've taken out just the 2 pieces of law so that you can see how strings are attached. Every piece of law will have something like this in it. Here's 1102, and you can see it there. It says guidance. Not more than 30 days after the date of enactment of this paragraph, the administrator, that's the Small Business Association, shall provide guidance to lenders under this paragraph on the deferment process described in the paragraph. The lenders would be the banks, and only the borrowers would be the churches or businesses. But there was a second one in this law as I read it, and you can see what it says there, called the sense of the Senate. I'm not going to read that, but you can read it. The sense of the Senate, it'll be the sense of the House, it could be the sense of the Senate. It puts a provision in there that the senators or the House, wherever the bill originated from, retain the right to step in and conduct hearings. Now, in the case of this one, Senator Marco Rubio, as an example, has stepped in and begun hearings on the way some of this money has been distributed. But I will submit that even next year, even if the Senate was not in control of the Republicans, the Democrats in the Senate could still step in under the provisions of this bill and pursue investigations on things. So every bill has something like that. So this is the origination of how strings will occur and occurs in the CARE Act. Okay, third slide, if we can have that. You can put it up there, Josh. There we go. All right, now, the Small Business Association, the administration, not the association, the administration, was the one that was given authority by Congress to administrate the CARE Act as it would go to small business and then ostensibly churches. The Small Business Association on April 23rd came out with some of their early guidelines. That's what they were called. What I have here is just a paragraph from a law firm, and a lot of law firms did this. They looked at it and they said, we got some issues here. And they sent this out to a number of people, basically telling them, and you'll see in the bottom line there, it says, while the interim rule or final rules and official guidance have answered some questions, many were left unanswered due to ambiguities or inconsistencies in the CARES Act itself, and I'll guarantee you it was very ambiguous. And the interim rules, it says, and they talked about stepping into the spot. Now, go to the next slide here if we can, Josh. And this is a part that came from the Small Business Administration that the law firm had taken and put out here, but this came in a lot of different forms of different people. Civil penalties. That civil penalties for violation of the act may include treble or triple damages, and you can see what's there. Statutory penalties, over $22,000 for false claim. The government may also pursue final criminal penalties, including jail time, under the False Claims Act. Now, the point here is that the advice to churches and recipient businesses, if you've made the application as a church, you had to certify that in fact these funds were necessary for your continuance. That's what the application called for. The guidance from the Small Business Administration, and as you see from the law firm raising the question, was you better make sure that you can certify that this money was necessary, meaning, would your church go out of business if you didn't get this money? Well, who can say that? But the point of it here is, if you can't say that, then you are open for a possible charge of civil fraud and all of these criminal activities. This is the guidance. These are strings that come with this quote unquote free money. And you see the problem? Now, not only in addition to this, you not only have to certify, but you do have to open up, because as a part of this is a potential audit. The Small Business Administration can come back in and audit your church or a business. And with that audit, you will have to provide information that frankly you may not have provided to anybody so far. That's, confidential type of a thing, because they don't say what they will be auditing. So this was the warning. This warning that came from law firms also came from banks who were lending the money. My own church, as an example, we got a hold of this, and we actually got an alert from the bank that was dealing with the church, basically saying the same thing, raising the questions. And this is where the potential really happens. Can you imagine a church being wrapped up with a potential fraud charge? What a testimony before the community. Having a church charged with fraud, meaning lying to the government as to need, you can see where I'm going, not a good thing. Let's go to the next slide if we could, Josh. Here I want to focus on one aspect where I think you may say, well, okay, we can avoid a fraud charge if we just don't take the money. And I'm saying that is correct. That's basically what they're saying. So if you've taken money and you have a question with you and your leadership, being able to certify that you would go out of business had you not taken this money, which is a really high standard, you may really strongly consider giving it back. If you do, you can do that by May 7th, I think through May 7th, and be held harmless. If you go through the process, then you may be suspect of other things. Now, here's a point that no one has talked anything about, and even good attorneys, and even attorneys, friends of mine who I know, who are in the space of defending religious freedom, have not mentioned this part. But this is really key, and I'd like you to think about this if you could. In the standpoint of the act, the law, the definition and the designation of church as a business is problematic. Nowhere in the law is the word church mentioned. It doesn't appear. So you say, well, how does the church then get involved as even a potential recipient of CARE Act? Well, it's because churches are dropped in to the classification of a nonprofit organization, which you can see right there from the law, 1102A7. Nonprofit means an organization described in this section as a 501c3 revenue under the Revenue Code. If you are a church that accepted years ago the designation of 501c3, then you are in fact referred to and viewed by the government, first of all, as a nonprofit organization, a business. Under this law, churches are grouped in as businesses, not churches. The section below, the second definition, talks about in addition to any small business concern, nonprofit organization. That's where churches are included. So churches are a part of the potential money because they are a 501c3. So if you are a church listening or watching me right now, and you are a freestanding church, a free church, put it in that perspective, a church that did not take 501c3 status, which churches don't have to have 501c3 status. But if you did not take a 501c3 status, you can't even apply for this because you're not a business, you're a church, okay? Let's go to the, let's hold it there, Josh. Just hold it there for now. Let me spend just a couple of moments here on this point. I want to plant a thought, if I could, pastors and church leaders. And that's in regard to the whole concept of 501c3. Years ago, when the IRS and the Treasury Department and Congress came up with the concept of nonprofits and for-profits, they came up with the concept of nonprofits, 501c. There are actually 501c 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, all the way up to 23. So there's 501c up to 23 different categories. Some are political, some are other things. 501c3 are nonprofits. Years ago, those in the legal profession and political profession came to churches and they said, we got a deal for you. This will help you, because your donors, they put it, we'll call them tithers, give to the church. This will allow them to take tax deductions, which frankly they still can, because churches are under the IRS right now in the code. Churches are historically tax exempt under the Constitution and under the IRS. They don't need 501c3, but they came with the idea 501c3 status will give you a lot of advantages. Well, one of the advantages I can think of, and I'm saying that pejoratively, was that if you all understand the phrase Johnson Amendment, remember the president when he ran in 2016, he discovered that a lot of pastors were not preaching boldly from the pulpit, and they said, well, we can't because we're limited by the Johnson Amendment. And the president said, what's this Johnson Amendment thing? I don't even know what this thing is. And he checked into it and he said, well, we're going to stop that. Well, he tried to, but the Johnson Amendment is still in effect. He's just ordered the IRS not to enforce any of it. But the Johnson Amendment was used as a threat to keep you and other pastors in the pulpit from preaching on matters of culture and issues, lest the fear was you would be violating the law, because pulpits, they say, can't speak politically. Well, the reason they weren't supposed to speak politically was not because they're churches, but because they were 501c3s. So when churches took a 501c3 years ago, they actually made a nexus and agreement with government. And the Johnson Amendment and the threat was a part of the strings. And I'm going to try and conclude here so we can go to questions. Not only my fear, I know this for a fact. If a church under law makes application for government money under the CARES Act, takes the money is given, and all that process, they sign their agreement, they effectively make a contract with government, the church has to admit to government that they are a business, that they are therefore, as a business, they are willing to play ball on Caesar's field. That makes sense? Businesses, nonprofits, profits, corporations, partnerships, sole proprietorships, any of those designations you put together, are by definition of the law creations of the state. The state government has a right to create business designations. That's what they are. 501c3 is one of them. So 501c3s are a creation of the state. So when a church says, I am a 501c3, the church really has said to government, I am willing to fall under your umbrella for whatever benefits may be, and therefore I am willing to play ball on your field. But what government gives, government can regulate. This money, any government nexus, authorizes the government, for them anyways, to think they have a legal right to regulate. And it's perhaps on this basis that I'm saying taking of care of money is so dangerous, because not only those first points I put up, there's nothing free, where there's money, there's always strings. This is how the strings occur. The strings are occurring through the regulations, and they occur because if this happens, the church is actually signing that we admit that and agree with the fact that we are a creation of the state, in as far as we are a 501c3, which is a creation of the state. We are asking for your money, and therefore we are putting ourselves in harm's way with your regulations. That is really the bottom line. That's why my recommendation is don't go near it, don't get wrapped up in it, because to do so is to form a nexus that actually is a legitimate law nexus that wouldn't exist otherwise if the church not stepped into the jurisdiction of civil government. I'm going to stop right there. Isaac, do we have any questions that you may want to pose that people have perhaps put forward at this point?
Yes, yeah, there are some questions here. Actually, while I go to those questions, a little bit of an aside, and Josh, maybe you can help us with this. Some of the folks are wondering if you can put up there in the chat box, or actually the question and answer box, would we be able to put the Zoom link that was sent out for tomorrow's meeting? A lot of people are interested in joining that, as well as maybe in just a moment, Sam, you might be able to explain some of that. And Josh, I don't know how much of this is possible, if you might be able to throw up the graphic on the screen there, not throw up, but put the graphic on the screen there for tomorrow's webcast as well, the time, and a little information there about Matt Staver with Liberty Counsel. Some of you have seen him on Fox News today and yesterday with all that's going on over in Kansas City, Missouri, and his role with that. Sam, when you talk about this, free money from the government, which is always interesting. In your experience working in the government, is this pretty normal that they pass something like the CARES Act and then they start to clarify it going down the road, more clarification comes out? Because it seems kind of weird they would pass this, but they didn't really explain it fully.
Isaac, that is exactly the way it always happens. And that's why when those are in office, I mean, I was in office, I told people, I said, we never, that wasn't a part of the law. We blame it on the bureaucrats. The bureaucracy are the ones who write the regulations. Every law will have a piece in it like I showed on the screen. Somebody is always designated as the entity to enforce, or not to enforce, but to carry out the law. That'll be some form of government. That may be the Department of Education. That may be the Agriculture Department. In this case, it was a small business administration. But some bureaucracy will always write regulations. They're the ones that most often produce the problems. Because very, very seldom in a law does a law ever state, and we will come after you and prosecute you, pastor, if you take this money. They don't say that. Because if they put it that blatantly in the law wouldn't be passed. So they write it ambiguously, as often happens, and then clarification comes from the bureaucracy. The bureaucracy is most often where the trouble occurs. That's then when the lawyers have to get involved, and it has to go down the road and go before the court, and then the court decide, but that could take years and thousands and hundreds of thousands of dollars of defense money. So long answer to your question, but yes, that's normal, and that's how troubles happen.
Okay. A couple more technical questions coming in here. Some are wondering if this session right now is being recorded, if it will be possibly made available at another date. And I can't remember what had been decided on that, Sam.
I believe that we were going to do so. I'm going to say that it was. I think Josh, who's working behind the scenes, was going to do that. It was our intent. Let's assume that it was.
All right. So let me just make another kind of announcement, and again, a reminder that if you want to ask questions right here on this format, I'm getting some text and different things too. You can go down to the Q&A. We're going to just have a few minutes here left. We're wrapping it up, but to the Q&A icon at the bottom of the screen. And so some of you are doing it that way. That's great. And then we will be sending out an email to kind of follow up with this. And I'm wondering, Sam, if in that email there might be the link for tomorrow morning's meeting that you referenced. Again, some folks are wanting that kind of information as well. Oh,
Um,
I think Josh is about to share some
yeah,
information on
maybe
that.
Josh will
There we
put
go.
something up on the screen here. There we go. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Josh. Tomorrow morning, from 10 o'clock a.m. to 11 o'clock, we're going to hold it pretty close to an hour. We're entitling this one Regathering the Church. And the intent here is to provide guidelines. We're going to provide some theological guidelines. Matt Staver, who leads Liberty Council, which many of you would recognize Matt's name probably. He'll be with us. He's going to give us some guidelines, probably about 15 minutes. We'll take about 10 minutes of Q&A, similar like we're doing today. I'm going to have a spokesperson, Kyle, I don't have his last name in front of me, I apologize, from Brotherhood Mutual, church insurers, and some of you listening may be insured by them. He'll be with us to give us some guidelines, again, from an insurer perspective of when you choose to regather as a church. From an insurer's perspective, what do you need to keep in mind? Matt's going to tell us the constitutional issue, why we need to be getting back to church. I will, and some others will share some things that are happening here in Pennsylvania. I know there's a group of about 20 churches in the southwest part of Pennsylvania that are going to be regathering on May the 17th. And they have worked through a list of a number of things that they're doing. And we'll have one of their spokespeople, Dr. Gary Dahl, who's one of my co-hosts on Staying on the Gap Today program, and the executive director of the Pennsylvania Pastors Network. He will share as a spokesperson for that group what they are doing. I think that will be very, very helpful. And our goal tomorrow is just to provide a forum where you can hear from other pastors and hear pretty much this guideline of what ought to be doing. And again, I'll be sharing a little bit from my perspective as how I think pastors in the pulpit ought to be relating and interrelating with the authority of civil government. That's a big issue. We'll talk about that tomorrow. And I'm going to tell you, as a pastor, I think you ought to be thinking much more boldly, perhaps, than maybe what you are. But we'll lay out some of those guidelines tomorrow. Isaac?
Okay. And if you go to papastors.net, you can find the information and the link there, papastors.net. If you're on the Pennsylvania Pastors email list, you'll get an email of it. So if you're not on that, maybe you're not even in Pennsylvania, but you'd like to see this, you could always go to papastors.net and get that information. A real quick question here, Sam, very important one, I think. What about churches who have applied for this and they want to give it back? Maybe, some churches, the money came in real quickly. They may have just sort of inquiring about it, came through. And what about in this particular case, one person is asking about a church that actually was approved and they applied, they're in the middle of the process. They're trying to get approved right now, and they're thinking about maybe they could stop it or cancel it. How do they go about stopping before it goes any further? And if it does go all the way to a church even getting the money, you said about giving the money back, how does one go about those things?
Every church, when they make application, and if you're already in that process, you've had to go to a bank, the lender, and you had to go through a process for that, fill out paperwork, which you've already done. That process can be stopped just by telling your bank you're not going to do anything. You don't want to pursue the process. If the money is approved for you, suppose you've made the application, you're notified by the bank that yes, in fact, the money has been approved. You do have to go back and do some additional signing. At that point, you just don't do it if that is your decision. Now, my point here is not to be telling you as a pastor in church, this is what you got to do. Understand that. I'm giving you some advice on the principles that are involved. And I'm saying if you go down the road, which you can because there are people being told to do this, then all I'm saying is do understand before the law, you are walking onto Caesar's field. And with the guidelines that came back, the threshold to prove necessary, which is the technical word that is necessary, is a pretty high standard. And if you fail to prove that, then you do open yourself up for audits and those criminal penalties. That is a fact under the law. So I'm putting that out there for that reason for you, but you can cease that. I would say that I do know of a church that actually received hundreds of thousands of dollars approved, put it into their bank account. All of this came out and they reconsidered and said, we do have savings on hand. We really can't honestly say that we can do this from an integrity perspective. But now this whole thing raises the issue of the risk. They're giving it back. So there is that procedure in place for that to be done. That makes sense? Hopefully that makes sense to you. Isaac, can't hear you.
There we go. Sam, thank you. That's great information there. Very practical, helpful. You've kind of given us the broad, field of it, as well as zoomed in on some certain, regulations. It's 3:35 right now, and we want to, keep this brief. I just want to say in closing here, as we want to thank all of you for being a part of this. And we would also like to just hear any feedback from you. We're going to be trying to send out an email to everyone. You're welcome to get feedback to us through that. You're welcome to go to AmericanPastorsNetwork.net or even email us at info@AmericanPastors.net. Or AmericanPastors.net, info@AmericanPastors.net. But we'd love to hear feedback from you, whether this was helpful, this format, the timing of it. And there are many other topics coming up that we'd be willing to do something like this if that is something that would help you. Sam, do you have any final words before we close in prayer?
Just one final word, Isaac. Pastors, you're listening to me right now. I guess I would counsel, if that would make sense, from all that we are involved in here to Pastors Network and involved with those in law and all of that kind of thing as we work through this. I would really say that view this interaction with the CARE Act is not a unique circumstance. It may be, a first circumstance of its type, but it's not going to be the last. And I think as you look around and you see everything is unfolding with this COVID policy, even the regathering of church is going to bring us into contact with civil authority in a way we've never dealt with as a church. If you're looking at what's being said about this effort to try and test everybody in the country to see whether or not they're infected, just think about that. Mandatory testing? Well, what's the Bible say about that? What are we going to do about that constitutionally in a matter of freedom? Or what Bill Gates is saying and some of these others are saying that's going to have a vaccination or maybe a tattooed implant in your arm that's invisible, but it's your proof, it's your immunity paper proof that you are not a hazard to society. It'll be the limitation of whether or not you travel or not. And of course, if you think with me, sounds an awful lot like end days type things, you're right. So I'm suggesting these times that we're walking through, just like this, are very teachable moments. Don't view it as unique, but a first of a series. And I think it's in this space that we have been talking internally with our other pastors and our staff here, that the American Pastors Network may be well equipped to help provide instruction and help on these thorny issues that cross over into government, the Constitution, and the church, and our families in a way that perhaps our entire generation have not had to look at before. So if that's an interest to you, give us a note. Let us know that, that would be, you want to be notified of things coming up in the future, because we're perceiving that is a great need. As I talk with pastors, I'm perceiving it as well. So I'll just let it go at that. But I think these are days of we need incredible wisdom.
Again, Sam, thank you so much for this helpful webinar webcast. And for those who maybe you have more questions or specific questions you want follow up, feel free to go to our website, and also feel free to contact us, info@americanpastors.net. And thank you so much for your time. Thanks for joining this. Let's close in prayer. Our gracious Heavenly Father, we thank you for the wisdom that we have through the Word of God, that it applies to all that we do. And in these situations where we don't always have specific, detailed information about these modern situations, we can still take the context of what we've had, and we can walk carefully, circumspectly, not foolishly, but as wise, to redeem the day in which you have given us, to redeem this time, to redeem each day as an opportunity to seek first your kingdom and to preach the gospel, the good news of Jesus Christ, which brings hope into every situation. I thank you for all of these men listening and for the congregations that they pastor and shepherd. I just pray now that your Spirit would work in a special way to guide us with your peace as well as your knowledge during these difficult times and these different opportunities that come our way, that we would make good decisions for your kingdom and for glory. It's in the precious name of Jesus Christ we pray. We thank you, Father. We love you. Amen. Well, Sam, thanks so much for this helpful information, and for all of you listening and watching today, thank you very much for being with us.